morning, brothers and sisters of Asia Pacific too. Of course, good morning to our Heavenly Parent and true parents, and thank you, President Masayoshi Hori, for this invitation to share this message to this region. This is the 9th year, 7th month, 29th day, according to the heavenly calendar. It is September 5, 2021. I've been asked to talk about the importance of the Pacific Christian Leadership Conference because this is being launched. Mother is supporting that, and we need to work together. We need your support to make this successful. But let's begin by looking at this from a historical perspective. Father talks about a 7-year course from 1945 to 1952. This is what he said. If Christianity had received me, I want to repeat that. If Christianity had received me in 1945, I would have united the world in 7 years through the blessing. I would have opened the gates of both earth and heaven and realized the kingdom of heaven. But as I sought to restore the nation, Christianity, together with the rest of the world, opposed me. So this opposition, Father talks about the role of Christianity, what they should have done and what they didn't do. To restore that. From 1945 to 1952, two unprincipled ideas took root and emerged in all of their ugly manifestation. Of course, they were there before, but bringing these ideologies on a world level created two big problems. The first is the problem of communism. And the second is the problem of free sex. Both emerged and manifest themselves during this 7-year period. Let's first look at communism. At the end of the Second World War, the Cold War began. So in 1945, then it became an ideological confrontation between the Allied powers centering on democracy and the Central powers centering on communism. The outcome, of course, it depends. And I believe it has been postponed to the age in which we are living in now. And so far, well, more than 150, some people say by now it's been 200 people have been killed. This ideology divided our homeland in Korea. And we know that the United Nations had a special resolution on June 25th in 1950 to protect the Korean people. This was not a peacekeeping operation, which the UN does in many countries of the world today. This was a military intervention. And during the Korean War, approximately 3 million people died, the majority of whom were civilians, 70%, making it perhaps the deadliest conflict of the Cold War. And communism expanded to, well, nearly 1/3 of the population, those who were either communist or sympathizers. And when we look at the atrocities, as was mentioned, this book, The Black Book of Communism, says 100 million people were killed, 65 million in. And then in Le Figaro, a French magazine, reputable, said the number is 150. And this magazine was published in 1978. So if we look at communism, what is the fallacy of communism that was not addressed then and is not addressed now and has manifested itself again in different forms? Well, let's look and be very clear. Communism advocates the abolition of the family. In Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, quote, "the abolition of the family, exclamation point." Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of communists. So Karl Marx is saying, even the most ardent, the most radical communists are saying, whoa, we have to abolish the family? Really? Really? Yes. Karl Marx also advocated the abolition of religion. Religion is the heart of of a soulless condition, it is the opium of the people. Karl Marx said we have to abolish capitalism. In this sense, the theory of communism may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. He went even further. The communists openly declare that their ends cannot be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Wow, they want to do a lot. So let's look. What are the common elements? What are the common denominators? And this is important because we'll see these things kind of emerging and playing out today. What's the common denominator? What is the problem with the family? What is the problem with religion? What is the problem with private property, capitalism? And what is the problem with all social conditions? It's one thing: hierarchy. So communism wants to destroy hierarchy. Well, the question obviously is, why destroy hierarchy? The false assumption of communism is this: hierarchy is evil because it is inherently unequal. So communism wants to define good and evil, and this is how they do it. Good and evil is based on equality. That's their assumption. Well, even in their ultimate ideal, their utopia, they talk about a classless society where there's no class at all. A classless society, think about it. That's like a family without parents. No class, no distinction between parents and children. That's like a school without teachers, no distinction between the teacher and the student. They have to be equal. Means the teacher cannot know more than the student. A city without a mayor, a nation without a president or prime minister. Impossible. So here we see the fallacy of communism in its. The true cause of exploitation, as the Kausa manual points out, is not hierarchy. That is not the problem. The problem is selfishness. Yes, hierarchy can be misused. That is true. But the hierarchy is not the problem. Leadership has a concentration of wealth and power. That's normal. Parents have more wealth and power than their children. The government has more wealth and power than the people. So leadership inherently has a concentration of power. That is necessary. So therefore, we must be very careful. It is very important that leaders be public-minded and unselfish. So this is the critical point. Where is the model of good leadership? Father said it's in the family. It's the unselfish parent that wants unhesitantly, again and again. And when the parent cannot sacrifice, tears flow from their eyes. Have you heard this before? The individual lives for the sake of the family for the community for the nation for the world, and the world for God. In essence, hierarchy is good. The problem is not hierarchy. So Father has identified a critical component of communism. In fact, Father has founded more activities for the peaceful opposition of communism than anyone in human history. He also met Gorbachev and Kim Il-sung, although he was imprisoned in a North Korean labor camp for nearly 3 years. Father's role in the downfall of communism: he has more experience, he has a global outreach, he has the deepest insights, he has invested the most, both in terms of monetary and commitment, going for 50 years or more, half a century, and the most sincere heart. He wants to help the communists. He doesn't harbor resentment. In the 1970s, the Day of Hope tours were conducted by Father when he came to America. Father spoke prophetic words that have great significance now amidst world affairs. In Father's speech, And October 20th, 1973, in the Washington Monument, this was in Independence Hall. I was there, part of his 21 city speaking tour. Thank you, Greg Stone, for this quote. I can see a great change, a new surge of revolution coming to America, not by fire, not by bullets, but by God's truth, kindling a revolution of men's heart. I have come here to ignite spiritual revolution. I do not come to demonstrate in front of the White House or in Lafayette Square. Lafayette Square is the park just in front of the White House. Sometimes they won't let you protest in front of the White House, but you can protest in the park in front of that. The answer does not lie here, but in the hearts of men, in the quiet revolution from selfishness to unselfishness. Let's keep this in mind as we move forward. We look at the free sex revolution. Well, let's call it what it is. It's not free sex, it's selfish sex. And when we examine that, we can see that the atrocities, the toll of human life, actually is equivalent to communism. One disease alone, UN AIDS said, there have been up to 110 million people have been infected by HIV/AIDS. 47.8 have died. And what about the other diseases? This is just one. Where did this sexual revolution begin? Well, it started in its manifestation and justification in America. Alfred Kinsey, he published 2 books. Look at the dates of those books. This was a 7-year period. 1948, for the first book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and his subsequent book in 1953, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. The introduction, the first page, the first paragraph of his first book, this is what it says. For some time now, there has been an increasing awareness among many people of the desirability of obtaining data about sex, which would represent an accumulation of scientific fact, completely divorced from the questions of moral value and social. Whoa. So they want to study sexuality and just the act of sex itself, delinking it from the moral values, the social customs. Really? And that's what this study does. Completely divorced from the questions of moral value and social customs. Well, with that parameter, with that foundation, with that condition of his study, his social study, which he proclaimed in the very beginning, the first page, this was the research that was done and published in America. The infamous Table 34. These are examples, you can see in the bottom, examples of multiple sexual orgasms in pre-adolescent males. Wow, look at this. 3 months old? I can't see. 3 months old? 3 times. 11-month-old, 2 years old. The oldest is 14 years old. Wow. So they studied these infants and preteens and some early teens about sexual orgasm. Oh, really? This published book. Sadomasochistic pederast. The question, how do you identify an orgasm in young children? Kinsey answered this on page 161, The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, writing that it involves still more violent convulsions of the body, heavy breathing, groaning, sobbing, or more violent cries, sometimes with an abundance of tears, especially among younger children. Some males experience excruciating pain and may scream. Males in the present group will fight away from the pedophile partner and may make violent attempts to avoid climax. Divorced from the questions of moral value. That was what this study looked at. No consideration for the effect of sexuality on the 800 children that were researched. They're adults. We could do that, but no, they've closed the Kinsey Institute files. Let's follow the science. No consideration for the effect of the sexual activity on marriage stability. No consideration for the effect of sexuality on the family integrity and larger social issues. No consideration. Can the dominant human activity define a social norm? Can we define goodness simply by a majority? That's what they're asking. There's no. An example is slavery. Every culture, every history had slavery, but still it was wrong. The majority does not define goodness, whether it's a majority of the government or a majority of the world population. But how was Kinsey received? In America, Christian America. Leading magazines, Time, Life, Look, McCall's. Had a best-selling book. A song was written. Tony Award-winning Broadway musical, and Rockefeller Foundation supported it. Here he is on the front of Time magazine. A few years later, the first Playboy magazine, again, during the 7-year period in 1953. But what is the philosophy of Playboy? Well, it takes from the same. If we recognize sex as not necessarily limited to procreation, what sex doesn't have to be limited to procreation, then we should also acknowledge openly that it is not necessarily limited to love either. Wow. So I don't need to worry about the children, and I don't need to worry about my partner. Selfish sex negates love, negates life, negates the family. It's just sex for personal pleasure. Well, that philosophy is dangerous. If it's in the monetary world, the business world, money for personal pleasure, it's a problem. If it's in the political world, power for personal pleasure, it's a problem. The problem is selfishness. Father says this over and over again. The principle of absolute sex, the point at which a husband and wife marry and love each other with true love, the heavenly palace, which is the origin of love, life, and lineage of God and humankind. It is the starting point of the ideal of the kingdom of heaven on earth and in the spiritual world. This teaching was the antidote to the free sex movement. Father's teaching about communism is the antidote to the communist advancement. So then what is the solution? The answer is simply God. Mother is saying the same thing. We need to seek God, not human solutions. So we go back to this concept of the separation of church and state and any society. It's a good concept, but it's been wrongly misunderstood. They have understood separation of church and state as there should be a firewall between the two, and they cannot infiltrate one or the other. That is not healthy. Separation doesn't mean no interaction. Separation means different responsibilities. They've not been clearly defined. Father does that. Mother does that. Well, what is the responsibility of the government? Man-made laws. The government is supposed to make laws, and those laws are supposed to create equality, fairness, and justice in society. They create tax laws and traffic laws, and they make laws for, businesses to live by. So governments are a lawmaking ability, and this is their responsibility. But that's not the role and responsibility of religion. Karl Marx took this role and responsibility of government and projected it on religion and saying religion is not doing what it should be doing, making everybody fair and equal. That's not the role of religion. That's the role of government. But what is the role of religion? It's more deeper, it's more fundamental than just equality, fairness, and justice. Then, what is the role of religion? Well, religion has the responsibility not to create, because that comes from God, but to promote, protect, and advocate moral laws, to define goodness itself. Goodness is not man-made. Because if goodness was man-made, then it would be centered on that particular state or that particular ideology. For example, totalitarianism or communism, they define goodness as the transition from animals, apes, to human beings through labor, language, and tool-making ability, centered on socialism. So if you are not working for the socialist state, you are human. Therefore, they can kill hundreds of millions of people because it's a man-made law. But religion is supposed to develop and protect the idea of goodness. This was at the root of America. I'm an American, I'm going to go back a little bit, but I'll bring it around to our Asia-Pacific region. George Washington, in his farewell address, said this, let us, this is his farewell address, his departing, his kind of legacy, let us, with caution, indulge in the supposition or in the assumption that morality can be maintained without religion. We can't do it. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail exclusion of religious principles. So he was saying we need religion in order to be moral. The second president of the United States, John Adams, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Abraham Lincoln called America almost a chosen people. A bit of humility and humor there. Almost chosen. But he did say, with the last best hope on earth. Senator Albert Beveridge, in the early 1900s, in the debate to annex Philippines, declared that God had marked the American people as his chosen nation to finally lead in the redemption of the world. This was the heart and spirit of America. Madeleine Albright, UN Secretary of State, called America an indispensable nation. Richard Nixon in 1960, his campaign affirmed, America came into the world 180 years ago, not just to have freedom for ourselves, but to carry it to the whole world. George W. Bush proclaimed in April 2004, as the greatest power on the face of the earth, we have an obligation to help spread freedom. That is what we have been called to do as far as I am concerned. So in his heart, yes, he has the responsibility of government, but he's also realized there's some divine purpose or power from America. Father talked about this too in 1971, called American Chosun. God chose the United States of America as the second Israel and raised up the American people through Christianity. God wanted to raise America through Christianity. Not just through military power, not through economic power, not through intellectual power, through Christianity. And entrust America with the mission to bring harmony and unity among all Christians. And so Father started a series of tours. Here is the New Future of Christianity in 1974, a 32-city tour. And if we look at these, it's just amazing. Father went out of America. He was proclaimed. He was given letters of recognition. He was given keys to the city. He was welcomed initially in America. It's an amazing foundation that Father had built because America was ready for this. And that was its purpose and goal. It's amazing. Newspaper articles. So where else? But then what happened is that, well, there was the Fraser Committee and then Father's tax law. The American government went after Father. That may be unavoidable. But what should have happened is the Christian voice should have come to protect Father, should have spoken out. The silence on the side of Christians was really a major problem. So where on earth is there a healthy harmony between Christianity and government? Where else? Well, many Pacific Island nations are culturally and constitutionally Christian. So if America could not fulfill her responsibility, where will God's providence shift? It needs this foundation. And if we look at this region, Heavenly Asia Pacific 2, there are 20 nations. There are 463 million in population. 142 are dominantly Christian. It's amazing. And in fact, when we look at the populations, predominantly Christians, 15 out of 21 nations have Christian population of 65% or more. Thank you, Julius, for this slide. I want to show you this because it is phenomenal. If we look at the constitution of the countries of the Oceania region, Samoa is founded on God. That's their motto. And in the preamble, it says it's an independent state based on Christian principles and the Samoan cultural and tradition. They want to keep their tradition, but they've inherited Christianity. And in the Republic of Vanuatu, their motto, in God we stand. And in their preamble, we hereby proclaim the establishment of the united and free Republic of Vanuatu, founded on tradition, Melanesian values, faith in God, and Christian principles. The state of Papua New Guinea. We, the people of Papua New Guinea, pledge ourselves to guard and pass on to those who come after us our noble traditions and Christian principles. Wow. And in the Solomon Islands, their motto, to lead is to serve. That's a principle. That's the fundamental principle of what Father says, live for the sake of others, and Mother calls Kyojang or filial piety. To lead is to serve, not to gain wealth and power and prestige. To lead is to serve. And we, the communities and people of Solomon Islands, respectful of our tradition, faith in God, and Christian principles. Kiribati. Their motto, health, peace, and prosperity. We, the people of Kiribati, acknowledging God as the Almighty Father, in whom we put trust and with faith in the enduring value of our tradition and heritage. The Philippines, their motto, Makadios, Makatao, Makakalikasan, at Makabanza. For God, people, nature, and country. We, the sovereign Filipino people, employing the aid of Almighty God. They don't talk about Christian principles because there's a substantial Muslim minority. And so, but both the Muslims and the Christians believe in God. And we need to believe in God. Why? In order to build a just and humane society and promote the common good. The Republic of Fiji. Fear God and honor the Queen. There's a proverb in the Old Testament that says that if you fear God, if you love God, you will hate evil. It's in the New Testament as well. No time to go into it. But there are 6 different public officials who take their oath of office, the oath of allegiance, the oath of the president, the oath for ministers, judicial officers, members of parliament, and speaker and deputy speaker. And they conclude their oath, so help me God. The Republic of Tonga, their motto, Tonga and God are my inheritance. Wow. The Declaration of Freedom is Article 1. Since it appears to be the will of God that man should be free as he has made all men of one blood. Where does this come from? This comes from the Bible, Genesis 1:27. We are all created in the image of God. Well, if that's the case, then we should be free. Nobody should be a slave to anyone else. And that worked its way out and launched the Emancipation Proclamation and the debate within American early colonies of slavery and the issue of the economic slavery needed in the South for tobacco and cotton and the industrial empire in the North. We don't need slavery, and it led to a civil war. Here, it's clear again. The Republic of Marshall Islands, the preamble. We, the people of the Republic of Marshall Islands, trusting in God, the giver of our life, liberty, and identity, and inherent rights. These things come from God. They're not man-made. Palau. Their motto is the House of Whispered Decisions. The preamble. We venture into the future with the full reliance on our own efforts and the divine guidance of Almighty God. Be responsible and trust in God. Wow, that's exactly what Father's talking about. These countries have been prepared at the foundation of their existence in the deepest root of the Constitution, the most important law of the land. Cook Islands, their motto, God is truth. And they begin, there are 4 oaths of office. They swear by Almighty God at the beginning, and they conclude, so help me God. Nauru, the motto, God's will first. Highest priority. And the preamble, whereas we, the people of Nauru, acknowledge God as the Almighty and everlasting Lord, and the giver of all good things. God is the giver of goodness itself. But these countries have paid a huge price. And during World War II, the Pacific Theater, geographically the largest stage of the war was here in this area. They tested nuclear weapons and they deployed nuclear weapons. Huge price to pay. With that background, let's now look at this Pacific Christian Leadership Conference. I am aware, and I'm not sure if all of you are, but the original ideal came from Oceania, and they wanted to create an Oceania Christian Leadership Conference. And then President Masaichi Hori, working with others, Yutaka-san I think was involved as well, said, let's make it even larger. Let's make it a Pacific Christian Leadership Conference. This idea came from this region. It's not imposed or given by international headquarters or even True Mother. It comes from the heart of the people. This was your desire, our desire. And so President Hori wrote a proposal, sent it to the international headquarters, and asked True Mother, can we launch this program in the Asia Pacific region? Mother said yes. We have taken a different responsibility, not to be obedient when directions come, which is necessary, but to take responsibility and to see what is needed and ask if this is in alignment with God's providence, and it is. And so we are launching the PCLC, Pacific Christian Leadership Conference. The original Christian Leadership Conference, the very first one, is not in America, the American Christian Leadership Conference or the World Clergy Leadership Conference. It starts here. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was established in 1975. The first president, here he is, Martin Luther King Jr. And this Christian Leadership Conference advocated two things: nonviolence, so they're not Marxist. They cannot use violence, and direct action. So they must be actively involved, socially involved, but cannot take violence. So they went to the streets of America. Water cannons and dogs were unleashed on the protesters, but they couldn't retaliate. This is the heart and spirit, and they advocated civil rights for all. Martin Luther paid for it with his life when he was assassinated in 1968, and Father called Martin Luther King the greatest American of the 20th century. That's the foundation. And behind that, of course, is providential history. So let's look at this Christian Leadership Conference. I'll talk about three areas: the uniqueness, the problems to be solved, and its contribution in solving these problems. First, the uniqueness. The uniqueness of the Pacific Christian Leadership Conference. It's not another faith-based organization, just to kind of gain clout, gain membership, gain prestige, and try and influence other people. That's not our mission. We're seeking not just national, but regional and global impact. We want to change the world. Mother has set that as her goal, clearly. It interacts with government organizations and NGOs. Importantly, the founders are Father and Mother Moon from Asia, not from the West. Father took the Asian movement that he formalized and tried to bring it to America so that the Asian values of family and filial piety could be brought to America. This is what is needed, what was needed. This was the solution to America's problems. And Father could see that. He said, I'm the firefighter coming from outside. I'm the doctor making a house visit. But America closed their eyes, shut their ears, persecuted and imprisoned Father. So Father was imprisoned by communists and by Christians. That's amazing. And yet he never held resentment against the communists, and he never held resentment against the Christians. In fact, we could even say that Christianity divided Father's nation. It divided this world. It even divided Father's family. All of this happened, but Father said, I must forgive. Christianity is too important, and continued to work in America for 33 years. Mother is continuing that today. This PCLC will offer exceptional insights into the Bible and history so that Christianity can become relevant, more relevant than ever. And we can solve major problems with this Christian foundation. It's not a vague concept of just faith, but it's a very practical, real problem-solving ideology that is urgently needed today. Through this PCLC, we will develop a deeper love and understanding for Jesus Christ. Next, what are the problems that need to be solved? Three main areas: lack of moral values, in other words, lack of a definition of goodness, the breakdown of the family, and a toxic global environment. And the PCLC, rooted in really the education and heritage of this entire movement, can address these problems. Let's look at the problems in terms of their manifestation. In Christian Europe, there was the Crusades against the Muslims. But in their own home ground, totalitarianism and communism emerged. The Holocaust and colonial exploitation. How does Mother solve these problems? Well, she went around the world and started her tour, reaching out to 7 nations with Senegal. She went to Goree Island, took a day off, and went to this slave island, as it's called, or this slave house. And the slaves were cramped into these quarters. Mother went there. And she listened to the story, and she saw the way they were treated and how they lived. They were in cages, in jails. And tears flowed from Mother's eyes onto this soil. And she said, I want to do a liberation ceremony. This is how Mother solved these problems. If we look at America today, well, we see slave trade. Of course, they had the emancipation, which has set a good model, needs to go more. But how were the Native Americans treated, the first people? Free sex, that issue hasn't been solved. Toxic individualism is now destroying this country. So the problems to be solved, well, Christianity is the largest religion in the world. It makes sense. Christianity has the largest responsibility in the world. This is why true father, true mother cannot give up on Christianity. And Father has said now it's shifted God's providence from America to the Asia Pacific realm. What will PCLC do? What contribution? Well, we love acronyms, so we've got 3 different acronyms to solve the problem: YSP, HTM, and UPF. I don't have time to go into them, but it's very simple. YSP talks about young people building character, and Mother emphasis on Hyojang. This deals with the first blessing. Heavenly Tribal Messiah, the restructuring, strengthening of marriage and family. That's the second blessing. And UPF creates an environment based on this so that we can then begin interacting with nation states to bring about this same, this same global perspective, this world view of universal values, mutual prosperity, and interdependence. And we had the first launching of our APLC Advisory Council on April 17th. And we invited Mark Abernathy from America. And he was bold and fearless, which is what Christians need to do when they speak. Because they speak not on their behalf or for their own glory, they speak on behalf of God. And he talked about the rampant confusion that is going on around the world, especially sexuality and the same-sex marriages that are being advocated wholesale. And we've got to deal with these issues because it's just making the problem worse. And we've set up an advisory council. It's still being formed, but members from the clergy, both the dominant Catholic and also other Christian denominations in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Australia, and New Zealand, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, Samoa, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Palau, Tuvalu. We're setting up an organization committee and having meetings weekly, even more, twice a week, centering on President Masaichi Hori. And you can see the committee members who are there. And we set up a working committee with different groups that are being set up. And this launching, here it's talked about, it's put on the calendar of events marking True Father's anniversary of his holy ascension in Seonghwa. So this launching, which will take place on October 5th, is part of Father's Sangwa ceremony. That's how important True Mother sees this providence. There are 2 dates. We're going to have a conference on the 4th of October, and we will have the inaugural rally on October 5th. We are inviting True Mother. We pray and hope that she will be able to come. I know she wants to, that's unquestioned. But the question may be time and her availability. We will have live broadcasts in Sydney, Australia, and in Manila, Philippines, virtual otherwise. And our goal is to bring 5,000 Christian leaders. The rally will have 144,000, and we will have at least 300 on two-way live interaction through participants. So these are the programs that we're looking at right now. On the October 4th conference, 3 sessions. The first one, PCLC's founding purpose and the vision for a heavenly unified world. Session 2, marriage in the garden, the role of the family in kingdom building. And session 3, the responsibility of Christian youth in building a heavenly community. Then on the 5th, we will have the rally, and we're putting together details of that now. It's being worked out, but we've got a basic plan to work with. There are goals for both days. Then we will be working with your sub-regional directors and national leaders, and I'm sure that you will want to eagerly participate in this process. The statement of purpose that we are working with right now for this Pacific Christian Leadership Conference is this. PCLC is a coalition, PCLC is a coalition of Christian leaders and organizations working together to strengthen marriages, restore communities of goodness, and help Christianity fulfill her destiny as a beacon of freedom, faith, and family. We share the hope of all ages to become one family under God. PCLC affirms God as our creator, the holiness of the Bible, the messiahship of Jesus and his sacrifice on the cross, while sincerely appreciating the work of Father and Mother Moon to protect, uplift, and unify the body of Christ. Going forward, we can see great hope. We talk about if we in this Asia Pacific too can get a coalition of Christians and working together with the government of these nations to understand, support true parents, then that will have a big impact, both in Korea. Mother keeps talking about the hard nut to crack is the Korean Christians. But if Christians in other parts of the world are understanding, appreciating, and working with true parents, then why not in Korea also? And also it can bring a revival of Christianity throughout the world, which is desperately needed these days. So the chairman of Think Tank 2022, which is a larger forum, is Ban Ki-moon, and the chairman for the Summit of Peace in the Korean Peninsula is Prime Minister Hun Sen. But we in the Asia Pacific realm don't think, well, this is going to take place in Korea or let other nations. We have a catalytical role to play in this. So in conclusion, I'm going to draw a quick conclusion here. I want to show the parallel between the 7-year course of True Father, 1945 and 1952, and True Mother now, 2020 to 2027. Father said this, through the blessed gates of both earth and heaven, and realize the kingdom of heaven. This is in her memoir. The marriage blessing ceremony in the Unification Church movement is the most sacred, and it is the variable marriage of the Lamb of which the Bible speaks. This Christian heritage, Mother will not let go. It's the foundation of her marriage, of her mission. Mother also said this, the very beginning of her Mother of Peace memoir. Just open it up. Sao Tome and Principe, an island nation of Africa that lies directly on the equator. It not only lies on the equator, the horizontal, it also lies on the prime meridian, the vertical. So the intersection of the prime meridian and the equator, look it up, Sao Tome. And Mother went there. And it had a blessing ceremony inside the Parliament building with the president, the vice president, and the speaker, the president, the prime minister, and speaker of the house attending with their wives. And Mother did one unique thing, it's written right here, the Holy Marriage Blessing, and the youth to make a pure love pledge. She asked the young people to make a pure love pledge before they did the holy wedding ceremony. This was the first time. This is a major, important change. Thank you, True Mother, for this. Mother also said, we can receive the marriage blessing and share it with our family and tribe. Then we can work together as messiahs to transform our nation. Such is a heavenly decree. Chunbo, and Mother has even made Chunbo just 43 couples. Just 43 couples. We can do that. So we had two ideologies that emerged and manifested themselves from 1945 to 1952, and they remain unsolved, basically. We have to solve them. Number one, we're now in a new time period, 2020 to 2027. Let's not make the same mistake. We have this neo-enlightenment where people are essentially defining goodness as equality. And they're saying anything that is inherently unequal is unjust or it's evil. And that can, the gender equality issue. And then men become labeled as toxic masculinity, and the family is rejected by that. And people that focus on just culture and race, and this race theory that is coming out, that my goodness depends on my race. No, it's much deeper than that. So we have to deal with that still. And the free sex movement, we have sexual anarchy today. So we've got to deal with them. Let's look. Father centered his work on Christianity and defined goodness as living for the sake of others. He had strong anti-communist work, promoted true family values and the blessing. True Mother, centering on Christianity, defining goodness as Hyojung, and is dealing with the enlightenment, bringing the pure love pledge into the blessing and advocating Changbo. When we look again at the calligraphies, which you all know, of True Father in Australia and New Zealand in 1992 during the Women's Federation for World Peace launching. In Sydney, Australia, November 30th, 1992, the unified world begins from Oceania. Let us work to make that a reality. We need to. This is a key that can unlock both our homeland of Korea and be a global providence for re-strengthening Christian values around the world. This will have a major impact, and we need to bring that. Revival must start here. In Auckland, New Zealand, a few days later on December 3rd, liberation of all humanity is by self-reliance. I conclude with this. Pacific Island nations, Father said this, it's in the Pyongyang. The small island nations of the Pacific, as well as Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Solomon Islands, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, need to work as one country, forming a union to sustain peace in the Pacific Rim civilization. This has been and will be the role of the Asia-Pacific Union, which Mother advocated in Japan and has been promoted both by Hun Sen and also Mahinda Rajapaksa from Sri Lanka. Two current prime ministers have advocated the need for the APU, the Asia-Pacific Union. So, having a unified Korea, having a unified world, we can work to support God's providence in this region. Thank you very much. And God bless you and your work. And as we reach out, I want to say that it's important that you reach the mega churches in your culture. Don't just go to the small churches. Go back again. It's a new providence. A new mindset is there, a new urgency, because people can see the problems, whether they are the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a huge debacle, or the chaotic confusion of human sexuality in the These problems now are too big to ignore. People's mindset are changing. So you've got to reach the mega churches in your culture, whether it's the Catholics in the Philippines, the Lutherans, the Methodists, whatever they are, or the Seventh-day Adventists. You've got to reach out again. And please do so with a new heart and a new determination. Again, thank you and God bless.